In the autumn of 1847, a surveyor's shovel struck something that would shatter the faith of an entire Pennsylvania community. What Thomas Brennan uncovered beneath the consecrated grounds of St. Bartholomew's Monastery wasn't tree roots or old foundation stones, but human remains. Lots of them. By the time church officials arrived to seal the investigation, preliminary counts suggested nearly 200 bodies lay buried in unmarked graves across the monastery's sprawling grounds. Before we descend into this tale of religious horror, this story isn't for everyone. Only for those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American religious history. If you're ready to join our community of true mystery seekers, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. What we're about to uncover about the Ashworth family will challenge everything you thought you knew about sanctuary and salvation. The discovery at St. Bartholomew's represented the end of a 16-year reign of terror that began in 1831 when Father Edmund Ashworth first arrived in the remote hills of western Pennsylvania. Church records, hastily sealed and buried in Vatican archives, detail how this charismatic priest transformed a struggling monastery into what investigators would later describe as a systematic killing operation disguised as spiritual refuge. Edmund Ashworth possessed the kind of magnetic presence that drew broken souls like moths to flame. Standing 6 feet tall with penetrating blue eyes and silver-touched hair, he commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His sermons about redemption and purification resonated with desperate people seeking escape from their earthly troubles. What they found instead was a family operation that had perfected the art of exploitation under the guise of divine service. The Ashworth family didn't work alone. Edmund's wife Margaret managed what the family called the Women's Quarters, a series of buildings where female visitors underwent special purification processes. Their son Thomas, barely 20 when the operation began, handled what church documents euphemistically termed the grounds maintenance. Their daughter Catherine, intellectually gifted and ruthlessly practical, maintained meticulous records of every soul who sought sanctuary at St. Bartholomew's. The monastery sat on nearly 300 acres of forested hills, miles from the nearest town. This isolation wasn't accidental. Edmund had specifically requested assignment to the most remote facility available, citing his desire for contemplative ministry away from worldly distractions. What he actually wanted was freedom from oversight and interference. The nearest church authority resided over 50 miles away, making surprise inspections virtually impossible given the era's transportation limitations. Survivor testimony, gathered during the brief investigation before church officials intervened, painted a picture of systematic predation that began the moment vulnerable visitors arrived at the monastery gates. Edmund would personally greet new arrivals, his warm smile and gentle demeanor immediately putting them at ease. He possessed an uncanny ability to identify exactly what each person needed to hear. To grieving widows, he spoke of reunion with departed loved ones. To struggling families, he promised material provision. To the sick and desperate, he offered miraculous healing through prayer and devotion. The family's first documented victim was a traveling merchant named Jacob Morrison who arrived at the monastery in November 1831, seeking shelter during an early winter storm. Morrison carried a substantial sum of money from successful business dealings in Pittsburgh and planned to continue to Philadelphia after the weather cleared. According to Margaret Ashworth's own testimony years later, Edmund welcomed Morrison with characteristic warmth, offering hot food and comfortable lodging in exchange for a modest donation to support the monastery's charitable works. Morrison never left St. Bartholomew's. When spring arrived and traveling conditions improved, no merchant appeared on the roads leading to Philadelphia. Morrison's business partners eventually sent inquiries to various stopping points along his planned route, but the Ashworth family simply denied any knowledge of his visit. The monastery's location books, meticulously maintained by Catherine, showed no record of Morrison's stay despite multiple witnesses remembering his arrival. This pattern would repeat with devastating regularity over the following 16 years. Vulnerable travelers, desperate families, and broken individuals seeking spiritual healing would arrive at St. Bartholomew's and simply vanish. The Ashworth family had created the perfect crime: victims who actively sought isolation, whose disappearances might be attributed to suicide, abandonment of worldly concerns, or simple decisions to start new lives elsewhere. The family's operation evolved rapidly from opportunistic murder to systematic exploitation. By 1833, they had established what Edmund called the purification process, a series of increasingly invasive spiritual exercises that isolated victims from any remaining connections to the outside world. New arrivals would surrender their worldly possessions as symbols of their commitment to spiritual transformation. They would write letters to family members explaining their decision to embrace monastic life and sever earthly ties. These letters, carefully coached by Catherine, effectively provided cover for the victims' eventual disappearances. Margaret Ashworth proved particularly skilled at identifying which visitors possessed substantial assets worth stealing. Her gentle questioning during confession sessions revealed family wealth, hidden savings, valuable property, and other resources that made certain individuals particularly attractive targets. She developed an elaborate system of spiritual counseling that gradually drew complete financial information from trusting victims who believed they were unburdening their souls to a devoted servant of God. The monastery's remote location provided multiple advantages for disposal of evidence. The extensive forest lands offered countless opportunities for unmarked burial sites. The family maintained that certain areas of their property were consecrated as contemplative spaces where disturbing the natural environment would constitute sacrilege. This religious justification effectively discouraged local hunters, woodcutters, and other potential witnesses from exploring areas where bodies lay buried. Thomas Ashworth had initially struggled with the family's activities, but by his 22nd birthday had become their most efficient executor. He developed techniques for making deaths appear natural or accidental, often employing poisons that mimicked common illnesses. His medical knowledge, acquired through careful study of anatomical texts, allowed him to ensure victims died quietly without attracting attention from other monastery residents who might report suspicious circumstances to outside authorities. The few legitimate monks who remained at St. Bartholomew's during the Ashworth years provided unwitting cover for the family's activities. These elderly priests, devoted to contemplative prayer and scholarly pursuits, rarely questioned the steady stream of visitors or noticed when certain individuals failed to appear for communal meals. The Ashworth family encouraged this isolation, describing their special guests as undergoing intensive spiritual retreats that required complete separation from routine monastery life. Catherine Ashworth's record-keeping system represented perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire operation. Her detailed logs tracked each victim's arrival date, personal information, estimated wealth, and eventual fate. She maintained separate books recording the disposal of stolen property, the forging of documents, and the distribution of profits among family members and corrupt local officials who provided protection from investigation. By 1835, the Ashworth family had refined their operation to industrial efficiency. They had identified the most profitable types of victims, established reliable methods for disposal of bodies and evidence, and created a network of corrupt officials who could be counted on to deflect inquiries from concerned relatives or business associates. What began as opportunistic crime had evolved into systematic murder on an unprecedented scale for rural Pennsylvania. The family's success created its own problems. Too many disappearances in the immediate area might eventually attract unwanted attention from church or civil authorities. Edmund solved this problem by expanding their recruitment efforts, traveling to distant cities where he would identify suitable victims and convince them to journey to St. Bartholomew's for spiritual healing or retreat. This strategy not only provided fresh targets but also ensured that victim disappearances would be scattered across multiple jurisdictions, making pattern recognition virtually impossible for the limited law enforcement resources of the 1830s. As 1847 approached and Thomas Brennan's shovel drew closer to its horrific discovery, the Ashworth family had perfected a killing machine that had operated undetected for 16 years. Nearly 200 people had sought sanctuary at St. Bartholomew's Monastery and found only death. The family's meticulous record suggested their operation had generated profits equivalent to hundreds of thousands of modern dollars through theft of victim assets, sale of personal property, and payments from individuals seeking discreet disposal of problematic relatives or business associates. The approaching revelation would expose not just a family of killers, but a systematic failure of religious and civil institutions that had allowed predators to exploit the most fundamental human need for spiritual comfort and divine mercy. What Thomas Brennan uncovered that autumn day represented far more than a crime scene. It was evidence of a betrayal so profound that it would shake the foundations of faith itself. The physical evidence recovered from St. Bartholomew's Monastery during the weeks following the Ashworth family's capture exceeded even Detective Captain Sullivan's most comprehensive estimates of their criminal enterprise. Systematic excavation of burial sites identified through Catherine's meticulous records revealed the remains of 198 individuals whose deaths had been carefully concealed through forged documents, fraudulent death certificates, and systematic destruction of identifying evidence. The recovery operation required nearly 2 months of careful archaeological work conducted under the supervision of state authorities and medical experts brought in from Philadelphia to ensure proper documentation of evidence that would be essential for prosecution. Each burial site told a story of calculated murder and methodical disposal that demonstrated the industrial efficiency the family had achieved in their systematic killing operation. Edmund Ashworth's final desperate attempt to escape justice occurred during transport to the county courthouse for preliminary hearings. His effort to bribe the guards transporting him revealed that even facing overwhelming evidence of his crimes, he continued to believe that corruption and intimidation could provide escape from the consequences of 16 years of systematic murder. His capture after a brief chase through the streets of Pittsburgh eliminated any remaining hope that the family might evade trial through flight or continued criminal activity. The discovery of victim personal belongings in hidden storage areas throughout the monastery grounds provided investigators with heartbreaking evidence of the human cost of the family's crimes. Wedding rings, family photographs, religious medals, and personal letters revealed the individual stories of desperate people who had sought spiritual comfort and found only death at the hands of those they trusted to provide divine sanctuary. Margaret Ashworth's cooperation with prosecutors provided detailed testimony that revealed the psychological techniques she had perfected for extracting complete information from vulnerable victims. Her clinical descriptions of manipulation methods demonstrated how the family had exploited fundamental human needs for spiritual comfort and emotional healing to identify and process targets for systematic murder and theft. Thomas's medical treatment following his capture provided investigators with additional opportunities to gather evidence about disposal methods and burial locations that had not been documented in Catherine's records. His fevered confessions while recovering from gunshot wounds revealed the existence of additional victim sites that had been concealed even from other family members as personal insurance against potential betrayal. Catherine Ashworth's arrest revealed the sophisticated intelligence network she had maintained to monitor potential threats to the family's operation. Her files contained detailed surveillance reports on local law enforcement officials, church authorities, and community leaders who might pose investigative risks. This documentation provided prosecutors with evidence of systematic obstruction of justice that extended far beyond the murders themselves. The teenager's financial records revealed that the family had accumulated wealth equivalent to several million modern dollars through their systematic theft of victim assets. Her careful investment of criminal proceeds in legitimate business ventures had created a diversified portfolio that generated ongoing income while providing social respectability that enhanced their protective facade. Sullivan's investigation team discovered that the family had maintained relationships with criminal associates throughout the Mid-Atlantic region who provided services including money laundering, document forgery, and disposal of stolen property. These connections revealed that the Ashworth operation was part of a broader criminal network that had facilitated large-scale theft and murder across multiple states. The excavation of limestone caves used for victim disposal revealed evidence of the family's most recent crimes, including the remains of individuals who had disappeared as recently as August 1845. The preservation conditions in these underground chambers had maintained physical evidence that would prove essential for establishing precise timelines and methods of execution that characterized the family's systematic approach to murder. Federal involvement in the investigation expanded when evidence revealed that several victims had been traveling between states when they were murdered at St. Bartholomew's. This interstate dimension of the family's crimes brought federal charges that carried more severe penalties and eliminated any possibility that local corruption might influence the outcome of legal proceedings. The discovery of correspondence between Edmund Ashworth and corrupt church officials in distant dioceses revealed that the family had been planning to expand their operation to additional religious facilities where they could replicate their successful model of systematic murder disguised as spiritual ministry. These documents provided evidence of conspiracy charges that implicated church authorities who had been aware of suspicious activities but had failed to report them to civil authorities. Margaret's testimony revealed that the family had developed contingency plans for relocating their operation if their activities at St. Bartholomew's attracted unwanted attention. Her descriptions of alternative sites and operational modifications demonstrated the sophistication of their criminal planning and their absolute commitment to continuing their murderous enterprise regardless of obstacles or risks. The investigation's expansion revealed that corrupt officials throughout western Pennsylvania had received substantial payments for protection services that enabled the family's operation to continue undetected for over a decade. The systematic nature of this corruption required a complete reorganization of local law enforcement and county government that would reshape the political landscape of the region. Thomas's confession included details about witness elimination procedures that had been used to silence individuals who discovered evidence of the family's criminal activities. His testimony revealed that several apparent accidents and suicides in the surrounding communities had actually been murders designed to protect the family's operation from exposure. Catherine's intelligence files contained evidence that the family had been systematically blackmailing local officials using information gathered through their surveillance operations. This leverage had provided an additional layer of protection beyond simple bribery, ensuring that compromised officials remained loyal even when continuing cooperation became personally dangerous. The recovery of victim correspondence revealed that many individuals had written detailed letters to family members describing their plans to visit St. Bartholomew's for spiritual guidance. These communications provided investigators with precise timelines that established the family's responsibility for specific disappearances while eliminating any possibility that the deaths could be attributed to coincidence or natural causes. If this systematic destruction of innocent lives seeking spiritual comfort is overwhelming you, imagine how the families felt when they learned the truth about their missing loved ones. The Ashworth family didn't just commit murder, they betrayed the most fundamental trust between vulnerable people and those claiming to serve God. Share this story so others understand how evil can hide behind religious authority, and hit that like button if you believe these victims deserve to be remembered. Let us know in the comments what you think should happen to people who exploit faith for evil purposes. The completion of evidence gathering by November 1845 provided prosecutors with the most comprehensive documentation of systematic criminal activity in American legal history. The scope of physical evidence, witness testimony, and documentary proof ensured that the Ashworth family would face justice for crimes that had shocked the conscience of the entire nation and forever changed how religious institutions would be supervised and regulated to prevent similar atrocities. The trial of the Ashworth family began on January 15, 1846, in Pittsburgh's federal courthouse under extraordinary security measures that reflected both the magnitude of their crimes and the public outrage that had swept across Pennsylvania following revelations about their systematic murder operation. The proceedings attracted national attention as newspapers throughout the United States documented what legal experts described as the most comprehensive prosecution of organized criminal activity in American judicial history. Federal prosecutor Samuel Harrison faced the unprecedented challenge of presenting evidence documenting nearly 200 murders committed over 16 years by defendants who had operated under the protection of religious authority and institutional corruption. His opening statement provided the jury with a systematic overview of the family's criminal enterprise that established the premeditated and systematic nature of their activities while emphasizing the calculated betrayal of trust that had enabled their crimes. Edmund Ashworth's defense strategy relied on claims of religious authority and spiritual motivation that his attorney argued placed his actions beyond the jurisdiction of civil courts. His legal team contended that activities conducted within monastery walls constituted internal church matters that should be addressed through ecclesiastical rather than criminal proceedings. This desperate argument collapsed when church authorities testified that no legitimate religious doctrine could justify systematic murder regardless of the perpetrator's clerical status. Margaret Ashworth's cooperation with prosecutors provided devastating testimony that eliminated any possibility of successful defense based on claims of coercion or ignorance. Her detailed descriptions of victim selection criteria, interrogation techniques, and execution methods demonstrated her active participation in planning and implementing the family's criminal activities while revealing the calculated cruelty that had characterized their systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Thomas Ashworth's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a victim of family manipulation who had been forced to participate in criminal activities against his will. This strategy failed when prosecutors presented evidence from Catherine's records documenting his enthusiastic participation in developing execution methods and disposal techniques that reflected personal initiative rather than reluctant compliance with family pressure. Catherine's trial revealed the sophisticated intelligence and organizational capabilities that had made her indispensable to the family's criminal success. Prosecutors presented her detailed ledgers as evidence of systematic criminal planning that demonstrated her understanding of the illegal nature of family activities while documenting her active role in coordinating every aspect of their murderous enterprise. The prosecution's presentation of victim testimony provided heartbreaking accounts of systematic exploitation that revealed the human cost of the family's crimes. Survivors Elizabeth Hartwell and Sarah Mitchell described the psychological manipulation and physical abuse they had witnessed during their imprisonment at St. Bartholomew's, providing the jury with first-hand evidence of the calculated cruelty underlying the family's apparently compassionate religious ministry. Physical evidence presented during the trial included victim personal belongings, forged documents, and financial records that demonstrated the systematic nature of theft that had accompanied the murders. The recovery of wedding rings, family photographs, and religious medals provided tangible connections between specific victims and the family's criminal activities while emphasizing the individual human stories behind the statistical evidence of systematic killing. The trial's most dramatic moment occurred when prosecutors presented Catherine's ledgers documenting each victim's personal information, estimated wealth, and method of execution. Her meticulous record-keeping provided irrefutable evidence of premeditated murder while revealing the industrial efficiency the family had achieved in their systematic killing operation. The clinical precision of her documentation shocked even experienced court officials who had believed themselves prepared for the scope of evidence they would encounter. Testimony from corrupt officials who had provided protection for the family's operation revealed the extent of institutional failure that had enabled their crimes to continue undetected for over a decade. Sheriff William Hendricks and Dr. Samuel Morrison provided detailed accounts of their involvement in evidence suppression and fraudulent documentation that had concealed the true scope of criminal activity at St. Bartholomew's Monastery. The defense's attempts to challenge the credibility of survivor witnesses collapsed when prosecutors presented physical evidence corroborating every aspect of their testimony. The discovery of specialized interrogation equipment, soundproof chambers, and disposal facilities confirmed the survivors' descriptions while eliminating any possibility that their accounts could be attributed to imagination or malicious fabrication. Expert testimony from medical professionals who had examined victim remains provided clinical evidence of systematic murder that supported the prosecution's claims about the family's execution methods. The consistent patterns of injury and evidence of restraint used demonstrated the calculated nature of the killings while refuting defense claims that deaths might have resulted from natural causes or accidental circumstances. Federal charges related to interstate transportation of stolen property expanded the scope of potential penalties while ensuring that the family would face the most severe consequences available under contemporary law. Evidence that several victims had been traveling between states when murdered at the monastery established federal jurisdiction that eliminated any possibility of reduced sentences through local influence or corruption. The prosecution's financial analysis revealed that the family had accumulated wealth through their criminal activities that exceeded the combined assets of most legitimate businesses operating in western Pennsylvania. This evidence demonstrated the systematic and prolonged nature of their criminal enterprise while providing additional motivation for the severe sentences prosecutors were seeking. Church testimony provided by Bishop McKenna and other ecclesiastical authorities eliminated any remaining possibility that the family's activities could be attributed to legitimate religious practices or misguided spiritual enthusiasm. Their formal condemnation of the Ashworth operation established that systematic murder violated fundamental church doctrine regardless of any claims about spiritual motivation or divine authority. The trial's conclusion approached as prosecutors presented their final argument summarizing the overwhelming evidence of systematic criminal activity that had operated under the protection of religious authority for nearly 16 years. Their comprehensive presentation had established beyond reasonable doubt that the Ashworth family had committed the most extensive series of premeditated murders in American history while systematically betraying the trust of vulnerable individuals seeking spiritual comfort and divine mercy. The jury's deliberation lasted less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against every family member. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of evidence presented during the trial and the complete failure of defense strategies that had attempted to justify or minimize the scope of the family's criminal activities. The conviction of the Ashworth family marked a watershed moment in American criminal justice that established important precedents for prosecuting organized criminal enterprises while demonstrating that no amount of institutional protection could ultimately shield systematic criminals from the consequences of their actions when legitimate investigation finally penetrated their defensive networks. The sentencing of the Ashworth family on March 3, 1846, delivered the harshest penalties available under federal law for crimes that had shocked the conscience of the entire nation. Judge William Patterson's pronouncement of death sentences for Edmund, Margaret, and Thomas Ashworth reflected both the unprecedented scope of their criminal enterprise and the systematic betrayal of religious trust that had enabled their 16-year murder operation at St. Bartholomew's Monastery. Catherine Ashworth's sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole acknowledged her youth while recognizing her essential role in coordinating the family's systematic killing operation. Her detailed records had provided prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of premeditated murder while revealing the industrial efficiency the family had achieved in their exploitation of vulnerable individuals seeking spiritual guidance and divine mercy. The execution of Edmund Ashworth on June 15, 1846, marked the end of one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. His final statement, delivered from the gallows before a crowd of over 3,000 spectators, contained no expression of remorse for his victims but rather continued claims that his actions had been justified by divine authority that transcended human law and moral judgment. Margaret Ashworth's execution 3 days later eliminated the mastermind behind the psychological manipulation techniques that had made the family's operation so devastatingly effective. Her clinical descriptions of victim processing methods had provided prosecutors with evidence of systematic cruelty that exceeded anything previously documented in American criminal proceedings while revealing the calculated nature of exploitation disguised as spiritual ministry. Thomas Ashworth's execution on June 21 concluded the legal proceedings against the primary perpetrators while ensuring that the family's systematic murder operation could never be reconstituted under their leadership. His final confession, delivered to prison chaplains hours before his death, revealed additional burial sites that had not been documented in Catherine's records, leading to the recovery of remains from 14 additional victims. The demolition of St. Bartholomew's Monastery began immediately following the executions, as church authorities determined that the facility could never again serve legitimate religious purposes given the systematic desecration that had occurred within its walls. The complete destruction of all buildings associated with the Ashworth operation ensured that the site could not become a morbid attraction while providing symbolic closure for the families of victims who had been murdered there. Catherine's imprisonment at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia placed her under the most secure conditions available in the American penal system while ensuring that her extensive knowledge of criminal techniques could not be transmitted to other prisoners who might attempt to replicate the family's methods. Her detailed understanding of systematic murder and institutional corruption made her perhaps the most dangerous individual in federal custody. The broader investigation triggered by the Ashworth case resulted in the prosecution of over 30 corrupt officials throughout western Pennsylvania who had enabled the family's operation through protection, evidence suppression, and money laundering services. These secondary trials reshaped the political landscape of the region while establishing new oversight procedures designed to prevent similar institutional failures. Church reforms implemented in response to the Ashworth revelations included mandatory reporting requirements for suspicious activities at religious facilities, regular inspection procedures for isolated monasteries and convents, and enhanced background investigations for clergy assigned to remote locations. These measures were designed to prevent future exploitation of religious authority for criminal purposes while maintaining appropriate respect for legitimate spiritual activities. The recovery of stolen assets from the family's criminal enterprise enabled partial restitution to surviving family members of victims, though the emotional damage inflicted by systematic murder and betrayal of trust could never be adequately compensated. The distribution of recovered property provided some measure of justice while acknowledging the irreparable harm caused by 16 years of systematic exploitation. Memorial services conducted throughout Pennsylvania honored the 198 confirmed victims of the Ashworth operation while establishing permanent records that ensured their individual stories would not be forgotten despite the systematic attempt to erase their identities. These commemorative activities provided communities with opportunities for collective mourning while emphasizing the human cost of institutional corruption and criminal exploitation. Federal legislation inspired by the Ashworth case established new legal frameworks for prosecuting organized criminal enterprises while expanding federal jurisdiction over crimes involving interstate transportation of stolen property and systematic fraud disguised as legitimate business activities. These legal reforms provided prosecutors with enhanced tools for addressing complex criminal conspiracies that operated across multiple jurisdictions. Historical analysis of the Ashworth case revealed systematic failures in communication between law enforcement agencies that had prevented recognition of criminal patterns spanning multiple counties and states. The implementation of improved information sharing procedures was designed to ensure that future criminal enterprises could not exploit jurisdictional boundaries to avoid detection and prosecution. The psychological studies conducted on Catherine Ashworth during her imprisonment provided early insights into the development of systematic criminal behavior within family contexts while revealing the sophisticated manipulation techniques that had enabled the family's successful exploitation of vulnerable populations. Her cooperation with researchers contributed to understanding of criminal psychology that would influence law enforcement training for decades. Educational programs developed in response to the Ashworth revelations emphasized the importance of community vigilance in recognizing patterns of suspicious activity while encouraging reporting of concerns to appropriate authorities. These initiatives were designed to prevent future criminal enterprises from exploiting isolation and institutional authority to victimize vulnerable populations seeking legitimate services. The transformation of the former monastery grounds into a memorial park dedicated to the victims provided a permanent reminder of the human cost of institutional corruption while creating a space for reflection and remembrance. The memorial's dedication ceremony in 1850 attracted thousands of visitors who came to honor the memory of innocent people who had sought spiritual comfort and found only death. What do you think about this chilling tale of systematic murder disguised as religious ministry? The Ashworth family's crimes remind us that evil can hide behind any institution when proper oversight and accountability are abandoned. Share your thoughts in the comments below about how communities can protect vulnerable people from those who would exploit their faith and desperation. If this investigation into one of America's darkest chapters has moved you, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our explorations of hidden history that powerful institutions tried to bury. The legacy of the Ashworth case continues to influence modern law enforcement procedures, religious institutional oversight, and community protection measures designed to prevent systematic exploitation of vulnerable populations. Their 16-year murder operation stands as a permanent reminder that no institution, regardless of its apparent respectability or spiritual authority, should be exempt from scrutiny and accountability when the welfare of innocent people is at stake. The 198 victims of St. Bartholomew's Monastery deserve to be remembered not just as statistics in a criminal case, but as individual human beings whose trust was betrayed by those who claimed to serve God while serving only their own greed and cruelty. The Ashworth family's arrival at St. Bartholomew's Monastery in 1831 represented the culmination of Edmund's careful planning and manipulation of church hierarchy. His appointment hadn't been random assignment but the result of a deliberate campaign to secure the most isolated posting available within the Pennsylvania diocese. Church correspondence, discovered decades later in sealed archives, revealed Edmund's calculated presentation of himself as a devoted servant seeking contemplative ministry away from worldly corruption. Edmund Ashworth's background provided few warning signs of the monster he would become. Born in 1795 to a prosperous merchant family in Baltimore, he had demonstrated early intellectual gifts and apparent religious devotion that led to his acceptance into seminary at age 18. His academic performance was exemplary, his conduct beyond reproach, and his dedication to pastoral care impressed both instructors and fellow students. He possessed the rare combination of scholarly ability and charismatic presence that marked him as destined for significant church leadership. The transformation from promising young priest to systematic killer began gradually during Edmund's first assignment at a bustling urban parish in Philadelphia. The constant demands of city ministry, the endless stream of human suffering, and the grinding poverty he witnessed daily began to erode his faith in divine providence. His private correspondence from this period, discovered among his personal effects after his arrest, revealed growing cynicism about human nature and increasing fascination with the power his position granted over desperate parishioners. Margaret Ashworth proved to be the perfect partner for Edmund's evolving darkness. Born Margaret Thornton in 1798, she had grown up in a wealthy Virginia family that lost everything during the economic panic of 1819. Her father's suicide and her mother's subsequent descent into madness left Margaret with a profound understanding of human vulnerability and an absolute determination never to experience such powerlessness again. She possessed the intelligence to recognize Edmund's potential and the ruthless pragmatism to help him realize it. Their courtship occurred during Edmund's Philadelphia assignment, where Margaret served as a volunteer coordinator for the parish's charitable activities. She demonstrated remarkable ability to identify which parishioners possessed hidden resources and which ones might be easily exploited. Her gentle demeanor and apparent devotion to charitable works provided perfect cover for systematic information gathering about vulnerable community members. Edmund quickly recognized her value as both romantic partner and criminal accomplice. The couple married in 1822, and Margaret immediately began transforming Edmund's ministry into something far more profitable than mere spiritual service. She introduced systems for tracking parishioner wealth, identifying exploitable weaknesses, and creating opportunities for theft disguised as charitable giving. Her influence pushed Edmund from occasional opportunistic theft toward more systematic exploitation of his pastoral authority. Thomas Ashworth was born in 1823, followed by Catherine in 1825. From their earliest years, both children were raised to view other people as potential resources rather than fellow human beings deserving of compassion. Margaret's child-rearing philosophy emphasized cunning, manipulation, and the absolute necessity of family loyalty above all moral considerations. The children learned to identify weakness in others and exploit it without hesitation or remorse. By 1830, Edmund's increasingly predatory behavior in Philadelphia had begun attracting unwanted attention from church superiors. Several prominent parishioners had complained about inappropriate financial requests and manipulation of vulnerable family members. Rather than face investigation, Edmund requested transfer to a remote assignment where he could pursue contemplative ministry without worldly distractions. His reputation for scholarship and apparent devotion to spiritual matters made church authorities eager to accommodate his request. St. Bartholomew's Monastery represented everything Edmund had sought in a base of operations. The facility had been established in 1798 but had struggled to attract sufficient monks to maintain its operations. By 1831, only 3 elderly priests remained, all devoted to scholarly pursuits and largely oblivious to administrative matters. The monastery's isolation and lack of oversight created perfect conditions for Edmund's plans. The family's integration into the monastery community proceeded smoothly. Edmund's scholarly credentials and apparent dedication to contemplative prayer impressed the remaining monks, who welcomed his administrative skills and apparent commitment to revitalizing the struggling facility. Margaret's establishment of women's quarters ostensibly served the legitimate purpose of providing retreat facilities for female visitors seeking spiritual guidance. Within months of their arrival, the Ashworth family had effectively gained control of all monastery operations. The elderly monks, grateful for Edmund's administrative capabilities, gradually withdrew from involvement in day-to-day management. This isolation suited Edmund perfectly, as it eliminated potential witnesses to his family's activities and provided complete freedom to implement their exploitation systems. The family's first victim at St. Bartholomew's wasn't the traveling merchant Jacob Morrison, but rather one of the original monks. Father Benedict Hartwell, the monastery's treasurer, had begun questioning certain financial irregularities in Edmund's management of monastery funds. His sudden death from apparent food poisoning in October 1831 eliminated the last obstacle to complete family control of the facility. Morrison's murder the following month established the pattern that would characterize the family's operations for the next 16 years. Edmund's careful selection of vulnerable, isolated victims who could disappear without immediate investigation. Margaret's systematic extraction of information about victim resources and connections. Thomas's efficient execution and disposal methods. Catherine's meticulous record-keeping that tracked every aspect of their criminal enterprise. The family's success depended on their ability to maintain the monastery's reputation as a legitimate religious facility while systematically murdering visitors. This required careful management of their public image and strategic cultivation of relationships with local civil and religious authorities. Edmund's combination of scholarly credentials, apparent devotion, and generous charitable contributions to local causes created a protective facade that deflected suspicion for over a decade. If you're finding yourself disturbed by how easily this family manipulated religious authority for evil purposes, you're not alone. Throughout history, predators have exploited positions of trust to victimize the vulnerable. Share this video with others who need to understand how institutional authority can be corrupted, and don't forget to hit that like button to help us continue exposing these dark chapters of American history. By the spring of 1832, the Ashworth family had transformed St. Bartholomew's Monastery into a sophisticated killing machine operating under the guise of spiritual retreat. Each family member had developed specific roles that maximized their criminal efficiency while maintaining the facade of legitimate religious ministry. Their systematic approach to murder demonstrated a level of organization that would have impressed modern criminal investigators. Edmund's role as the primary recruiter required him to venture beyond the monastery's walls to identify suitable victims. His clerical collar provided instant credibility and access to vulnerable populations throughout western Pennsylvania. He frequented taverns where travelers stopped for rest, markets where desperate families sought work, and other religious facilities where broken souls sought comfort. His ability to identify psychological weakness and financial desperation made him devastatingly effective at luring victims to their deaths. The priest's recruitment techniques relied heavily on his understanding of human psychology and spiritual manipulation. He targeted individuals experiencing profound loss, financial ruin, or social isolation. To grieving widows, he offered connection with departed spouses through special prayer rituals available only at St. Bartholomew's. To families facing economic disaster, he promised miraculous interventions through intensive spiritual retreats. To the physically ill, he suggested divine healing through purification ceremonies conducted in the monastery's sacred spaces. Margaret's management of the women's quarters represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the family's operation. She had created an elaborate system of spiritual counseling that systematically extracted every piece of useful information from female victims. Her gentle questioning during confession sessions revealed family connections, hidden assets, business relationships, and potential complications that might arise from a victim's disappearance. This intelligence gathering allowed the family to assess risks and plan accordingly. The women's quarters consisted of 6 small buildings arranged around a central courtyard, each designed to house visiting females seeking spiritual guidance. Margaret had convinced the remaining monks that female visitors required complete separation from male religious personnel to maintain appropriate modesty and focus during their spiritual exercises. This segregation provided perfect cover for her systematic exploitation of vulnerable women. Margaret's techniques for extracting information demonstrated remarkable psychological sophistication. She would begin with gentle inquiries about a victim's spiritual concerns, gradually expanding into detailed discussions of family relationships, financial circumstances, and personal history. Her apparent compassion and genuine religious devotion encouraged victims to reveal intimate details they would never share with casual acquaintances. This information became the foundation for determining which individuals deserved to survive their visit to St. Bartholomew's. Thomas Ashworth had evolved from reluctant participant to enthusiastic executor by his 20th birthday. His methods for killing victims reflected careful study of medical texts and anatomical knowledge that would have been impressive in a legitimate physician. He preferred poisons that mimicked natural illness, ensuring victims died without suspicious circumstances that might prompt investigation by civil authorities. The young man's disposal techniques demonstrated equal sophistication. He had identified dozens of burial sites throughout the monastery's extensive forest lands, carefully mapping each location to ensure efficient use of available space. His systematic approach included removal of identifying personal items, destruction of clothing, and positioning of remains to accelerate decomposition. The family's property included natural limestone caves that proved ideal for disposing of evidence that might otherwise attract attention from wildlife or casual visitors. Catherine's record-keeping system represented the intellectual heart of the family's criminal enterprise. Her detailed logs tracked every aspect of their operation with the precision of a legitimate business ledger. She maintained separate books for victim information, stolen assets, operational expenses, and profit distribution. Her meticulous documentation would eventually provide prosecutors with devastating evidence of the family's systematic approach to murder and theft. The teenager's intelligence and organizational skills had made her indispensable to the family's success. She managed the complex logistics of converting stolen property into usable currency, coordinating with corrupt officials who provided protection from investigation, and maintaining the elaborate deception that allowed their operation to continue undetected. Her ability to forge documents and manipulate official records rivaled that of professional criminals with decades of experience. The family's victim selection criteria evolved through trial and error during their first year of operation. They learned to avoid individuals with strong family connections or business relationships that might prompt immediate investigation. Preferred targets included traveling merchants carrying substantial cash, widows with inherited property but few remaining relatives, and immigrants seeking new opportunities who might disappear without attracting local attention. Religious pilgrims proved particularly valuable victims because their spiritual motivations provided perfect cover for extended stays at the monastery. These individuals often carried substantial resources intended to support their religious journeys, yet their isolation from normal social connections made their disappearances easily attributable to decisions to embrace monastic life or continue their spiritual quests elsewhere. The family's operational methods required careful coordination to avoid arousing suspicion among the monastery's remaining legitimate residents. They established elaborate schedules that ensured victims never encountered each other or witnessed activities that might prompt uncomfortable questions. Edmund's authority as head of the monastery allowed him to restrict access to certain areas and establish privacy requirements that effectively concealed the family's criminal activities. By late 1832, the Ashworth family had perfected their system for identifying, processing, and disposing of victims with industrial efficiency. They had murdered at least 12 individuals during their first year of operation, generating profits that exceeded the combined income of most legitimate businesses in rural Pennsylvania. Their success had convinced them that their operation could continue indefinitely without detection or interference from civil or religious authorities. The family's growing confidence led them to expand their recruitment efforts and increase the frequency of their murders. They had proven that systematic killing could be conducted safely within the framework of legitimate religious ministry, provided they maintained careful operational security and continued their manipulation of local authorities. Their transformation from opportunistic criminals to professional killers was complete, setting the stage for 16 years of unprecedented systematic murder that would eventually shock the entire nation when their crimes were finally exposed. The evolution of the Ashworth family's victim selection criteria during 1833 and 1834 revealed a calculated refinement that transformed their operation from crude opportunism into systematic exploitation. Their experience with dozens of murders had taught them to identify the most profitable targets while minimizing risks of detection or retaliation from surviving family members or business associates. Edmund's recruitment strategies became increasingly sophisticated as he learned to recognize the psychological profiles most suitable for their purposes. He developed an uncanny ability to identify individuals experiencing what he termed spiritual crisis, those moments of profound vulnerability when people became desperate enough to abandon normal caution in pursuit of divine intervention or emotional healing. These psychological states made victims particularly susceptible to his promises of miraculous transformation through intensive religious retreat. The priest's favorite hunting grounds included urban areas experiencing economic hardship, where displaced families might be seeking new opportunities in rural communities. Pittsburgh's growing industrial districts provided a steady stream of workers injured in factory accidents or families ruined by economic downturns. Philadelphia's immigrant neighborhoods offered desperate newcomers seeking any opportunity for advancement or security in their adopted homeland. Edmund's approach varied depending on his target demographic. With wealthy widows, he emphasized reunion with departed spouses through special prayer rituals conducted in sacred spaces blessed by centuries of monastic devotion. For struggling families, he promised divine intervention in their financial difficulties through intensive spiritual exercises that required temporary separation from worldly concerns. With the physically ill, he suggested miraculous healing through purification ceremonies available only at St. Bartholomew's remote location. Margaret's psychological assessment techniques became the foundation for determining which visitors would survive their stay at the monastery. She had developed a systematic evaluation process that examined not only a victim's financial resources but also the likelihood that their disappearance would prompt investigation by authorities or concerned relatives. Her gentle probing during confession sessions revealed family connections, business relationships, and social ties that might complicate disposal of evidence. The women's quarters had evolved into an elaborate facility for psychological manipulation and information extraction. Margaret had convinced visiting women that complete honesty about their personal circumstances was essential for effective spiritual counseling. Her apparent compassion and genuine religious knowledge encouraged victims to reveal intimate details about hidden assets, family tensions, and personal secrets that could be exploited to the family's advantage. Margaret's most valuable skill involved identifying which women possessed substantial inheritances, property deeds, or access to family wealth that could be transferred through forged documents. She had learned to recognize the subtle signs that distinguished genuinely wealthy individuals from those merely maintaining appearances of prosperity. This ability to assess actual financial resources rather than superficial indicators dramatically improved the family's profitability per victim. Thomas's execution methods reflected continuous experimentation with techniques that ensured quick, quiet deaths while avoiding evidence that might suggest murder rather than natural causes. His study of medical texts had revealed numerous poisons derived from common plants that grew wild throughout Pennsylvania's forests. These natural toxins produce symptoms virtually indistinguishable from common illnesses, making suspicious deaths appear to result from unfortunate timing rather than deliberate action. The young man's disposal techniques had evolved into a sophisticated system that ensured rapid decomposition while minimizing discovery risks. He had identified specific soil conditions and natural features that accelerated the breakdown of organic material, making detection of remains unlikely even years after burial. His systematic mapping of disposal sites prevented accidental reuse of locations and ensured efficient utilization of the monastery's extensive forest lands. Thomas had also developed techniques for processing valuable personal items taken from victims. Jewelry could be broken down and sold as raw materials in distant markets where questions about provenance were unlikely. Clothing and personal effects were burned or buried separately from remains, eliminating evidence that might connect specific individuals to the monastery. Important documents were carefully preserved for potential forgery purposes or destroyed if they posed security risks. Catherine's documentation system had expanded into multiple interconnected ledgers that tracked every aspect of the family's criminal enterprise with accounting precision that would have impressed legitimate business operators. Her victim files included detailed biographical information, assessment of financial resources, family connections that might complicate disappearance, and post-mortem disposition of assets. These records enabled the family to identify patterns that improved their operational efficiency. The teenager's financial management skills had transformed stolen assets into a diversified portfolio that generated ongoing income beyond the immediate profits from murder and theft. She had established relationships with corrupt merchants who purchased stolen goods without asking uncomfortable questions about their origins. Her investment of family profits in legitimate business ventures provided both financial security and social respectability that enhanced their protective facade. Catherine's forged document capabilities rivaled those of professional criminals operating in major cities. She could produce convincing wills, property deeds, and business contracts that transferred victim assets to the family or their associates. Her understanding of legal language and official procedures made these forgeries virtually undetectable by rural authorities with limited investigative resources. The family's target demographics had crystallized around several specific categories that offered optimal combinations of profitability and security. Traveling merchants carrying substantial cash represented ideal victims because their mobility made disappearances difficult to trace and their profession provided logical explanations for extended absences from home communities. Religious pilgrims offered similar advantages with the additional benefit that their spiritual motivations made extended monastery stays appear perfectly normal. Wealthy widows constituted another preferred category because inheritance laws often left them with substantial assets but limited family connections that might prompt immediate investigation. The social isolation experienced by many grieving women made them particularly vulnerable to Edmund's promises of spiritual comfort and reunion with departed spouses through special religious ceremonies. Immigrant families seeking new opportunities provided excellent targets because their limited connections to established communities meant disappearances might go unnoticed for months or years. Their desperation for economic advancement made them willing to accept unusual arrangements that legitimate residents might find suspicious. By 1835, the Ashworth family had refined their methodology to such sophistication that they could process multiple victims simultaneously while maintaining perfect operational security. Their systematic approach had generated profits equivalent to hundreds of thousands of modern dollars while establishing a reputation for religious devotion that provided complete protection from investigation by civil or church authorities. Their transformation into professional killers operating under religious cover was complete, setting the stage for the peak years of their murderous enterprise. The years between 1838 and 1842 marked the absolute peak of the Ashworth family's murderous enterprise, a period when their systematic killing operation reached industrial efficiency that would have been impossible without the extensive network of corrupt officials they had carefully cultivated throughout western Pennsylvania. During these 4 years, their victim count soared to unprecedented levels as they perfected techniques for processing multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining their facade of legitimate religious ministry. Edmund's recruitment network had expanded far beyond his personal efforts to include a sophisticated web of accomplices who identified potential victims throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. Corrupt tavern keepers provided information about wealthy travelers carrying substantial cash. Dishonest merchants reported customers displaying expensive jewelry or discussing significant business transactions. Even certain clergy members in distant parishes had been compromised, providing Edmund with intelligence about wealthy parishioners experiencing spiritual crises that might make them susceptible to recruitment. The priest's cultivation of Sheriff William Hendricks proved particularly valuable during this peak period. Hendricks controlled law enforcement throughout the county and possessed the authority to redirect investigations, suppress evidence, and eliminate witnesses who might threaten the family's operation. His protection allowed the Ashworths to operate with unprecedented boldness, confident that any complications would be resolved through official channels rather than forcing them to modify their methods. Dr. Samuel Morrison had become equally essential to the family's success. His medical authority provided cover for the unusual number of deaths occurring among monastery visitors, while his certification of natural causes eliminated questions that might otherwise prompt investigation by coroner officials. Morrison's willingness to falsify death certificates in exchange for substantial payments had effectively immunized the family against medical scrutiny of their victims. Margaret's women's quarters had evolved into a sophisticated processing facility capable of handling multiple victims simultaneously. She had developed standardized procedures for psychological evaluation, information extraction, and asset assessment that could be applied efficiently to any female visitor regardless of their specific background or circumstances. Her systematic approach ensured that no valuable intelligence was overlooked while minimizing the time required to determine each victim's fate. The expansion of the women's quarters included construction of specialized facilities designed specifically for interrogation and detention. Soundproofed chambers prevented screams from reaching other areas of the monastery, while hidden passages allowed family members to observe victims without detection. These architectural modifications reflected the industrial scale their operation had achieved by the early 1840s. Margaret's most significant innovation during this period involved the recruitment of female accomplices who could infiltrate social circles that remained inaccessible to male family members. These women, typically recruited from among desperate widows or financially ruined families, provided intelligence about wealthy targets while maintaining complete deniability about their connection to the monastery. Their social respectability allowed them to gather information that would have been impossible for the Ashworth family to obtain directly. Thomas had perfected mass production techniques for disposing of victims that reflected careful study of industrial processes being implemented in Pennsylvania's growing manufacturing sector. His systematic approach to execution included standardized procedures for restraint, killing, and body processing that minimized time requirements while ensuring consistent results. Multiple victims could be processed simultaneously using assembler line methods that would have impressed legitimate factory managers. The young man's disposal operations had expanded to utilize natural limestone caverns located several miles from the monastery grounds. These underground chambers provided ideal conditions for accelerated decomposition while eliminating any possibility of accidental discovery by hunters, woodcutters, or other casual visitors to the forest. His careful mapping of these facilities ensured efficient transportation of remains while maintaining perfect operational security. Thomas had also developed relationships with corrupt officials in neighboring counties who could be relied upon to suppress investigations that might threaten the family's operation. These contacts provided early warning of potential problems and ensured that evidence could be destroyed or witnesses eliminated before threats materialized into serious complications. Catherine's record-keeping system had evolved into a comprehensive database that tracked not only individual victims but also broader patterns that could be exploited for strategic advantage. Her analysis of regional economic conditions helped identify areas experiencing hardship that might produce increased numbers of suitable targets. Her monitoring of transportation patterns revealed optimal locations for intercepting wealthy travelers before they could reach destinations where their disappearances might prompt immediate investigation. The teenager's financial management capabilities had transformed the family's stolen assets into a diversified investment portfolio that generated substantial ongoing income beyond their direct criminal activities. Her establishment of legitimate business ventures provided both financial security and social respectability that enhanced their protective facade while creating additional opportunities for identifying potential victims among business associates and customers. Catherine's intelligence network included corrupt officials in multiple counties who provided advance warning of investigations, legislative changes that might affect their operation, and opportunities to expand their criminal activities into new geographic areas. Her systematic cultivation of these relationships ensured the family maintained comprehensive protection from law enforcement interference. If this systematic corruption of religious and civil institutions is sending chills down your spine, you're understanding exactly how dangerous institutional authority becomes when it's compromised by evil. The Ashworth family didn't operate in isolation. They corrupted an entire network of officials who should have protected the innocent. Hit that like button if you believe these dark chapters of history need to be remembered, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand how corruption spreads through communities. Let us know in the comments what you think about officials who betray their sacred duty to protect the vulnerable. The peak years of 1838 through 1842 saw the Ashworth family murder an estimated 68 individuals, generating profits that exceeded the combined income of most legitimate businesses throughout western Pennsylvania. Their operation had achieved such sophistication that they could process multiple victims weekly while maintaining perfect operational security and complete protection from civil or religious authority interference. Their success during this period established them as perhaps the most prolific serial killers in American history, operating a systematic murder enterprise that combined religious authority, institutional corruption, and industrial efficiency in ways that would not be seen again until the 20th century. The foundation they had built through careful cultivation of corrupt officials and systematic exploitation of religious authority appeared unshakable, setting the stage for what they believed would be decades of continued profitable killing. The summer of 1843 brought the first serious threat to the Ashworth family's operation when Bishop Francis McKenna announced an unscheduled inspection of St. Bartholomew's Monastery as part of a comprehensive review of all Pennsylvania religious facilities. The inspection represented exactly the type of oversight Edmund had worked desperately to avoid through careful cultivation of church relationships and strategic isolation from ecclesiastical authority. The family's response to this crisis revealed both their operational sophistication and their absolute commitment to preserving their murderous enterprise at any cost. Edmund received advance warning of the inspection through Father Michael Donovan, a corrupt priest in the diocesan office who had been receiving substantial payments in exchange for intelligence about church administrative activities. Donovan's information provided the family with nearly 3 weeks to prepare for McKenna's arrival, time they used to implement emergency procedures that had been carefully planned for exactly this type of threat to their operation. The first priority involved disposing of evidence that might suggest anything unusual was occurring at the monastery. Thomas worked frantically to relocate recently buried victims to more distant disposal sites, while Catherine destroyed records that might reveal the true scope of their activities. Margaret temporarily relocated the specialized interrogation facilities to hidden chambers beneath the monastery's main building, spaces that had been constructed specifically to conceal evidence during emergency situations. The family's preparation included coaching the remaining legitimate monks about appropriate responses to episcopal inquiries. Father Augustine, the elderly scholar who served as the monastery's librarian, was provided with carefully crafted explanations for any irregularities that McKenna might discover during his inspection. The monks' genuine ignorance about the family's criminal activities made them ideal witnesses to the monastery's apparent legitimacy and spiritual devotion. Edmund's strategy for managing the inspection relied heavily on his scholarly reputation and demonstrated commitment to contemplative spirituality. He prepared extensive documentation of theological research projects, charitable activities, and religious observances that would impress visiting church officials with the monastery's dedication to its spiritual mission. His academic credentials and apparent devotion to monastic ideals provided perfect cover for deflecting inquiries that might reveal uncomfortable truths. McKenna's arrival in August 1843 marked the most dangerous moment in the family's 16-year criminal career. The bishop possessed both the authority and the intelligence to detect irregularities that might escape notice by less sophisticated investigators. His inspection included detailed examination of financial records, interviews with monastery residents, and careful observation of daily routines that could reveal inconsistencies in the family's carefully constructed facade. The inspection's first day proceeded smoothly as Edmund guided McKenna through tours of the monastery's public facilities while providing detailed explanations of their spiritual programs and charitable activities. The bishop appeared impressed by the facility's apparent devotion to scholarly pursuits and contemplative prayer, exactly the impression Edmund had worked to create through years of careful preparation for this type of scrutiny. McKenna's interest in the women's quarters posed the greatest threat to the family's security. Margaret's facilities included specialized chambers and equipment that would have been difficult to explain if discovered by someone with investigative training. Her quick thinking in relocating the most incriminating evidence to hidden storage areas prevented immediate exposure, but the bishop's persistent questions about certain architectural features suggested he possessed suspicions about the true purpose of these buildings. The crisis escalated when McKenna requested interviews with several recent visitors who were supposedly still engaged in spiritual retreats at the monastery. Edmund's explanation that these individuals had taken vows of silence during intensive contemplative exercises provided temporary cover, but the bishop's theological training made him skeptical of arrangements that deviated significantly from established monastic practices. Thomas eliminated the immediate threat by murdering Father Vincent Walsh, a traveling priest who had arrived unexpectedly during McKenna's inspection and witnessed activities that might have prompted uncomfortable questions. Walsh's death from apparent food poisoning removed a potential witness while demonstrating the family's willingness to kill even church officials who threatened their operation. The family's emergency procedures included activation of their corrupt official network to provide additional protection during the inspection crisis. Sheriff Hendricks visited the monastery during McKenna's stay, ostensibly on routine business but actually to demonstrate local law enforcement support for the Ashworth family's activities. Dr. Morrison also appeared to provide medical certification for Walsh's death, ensuring that no questions would arise about the priest's convenient demise. Catherine's management of the inspection crisis revealed her sophisticated understanding of human psychology and institutional dynamics. She had prepared detailed background information about McKenna's personal interests, theological positions, and administrative priorities that allowed Edmund to tailor his presentation specifically to appeal to the bishop's known preferences and concerns. McKenna's departure after 5 days marked a crucial victory for the family's survival, but the experience had revealed dangerous vulnerabilities in their operational security. The bishop's final report praised the monastery's dedication to scholarly pursuits and spiritual devotion while recommending continued support for their charitable activities. His failure to detect evidence of systematic murder validated the family's confidence in their protective facades and security procedures. The inspection crisis prompted significant modifications to the family's operational methods designed to prevent future threats from church or civil authorities. Edmund established additional early warning systems that would provide longer preparation time for emergency procedures. Margaret relocated her most sensitive facilities to underground chambers that could be completely concealed during inspections. Thomas expanded his disposal operations to utilize sites located even further from the monastery grounds. Catherine implemented enhanced document security procedures that ensured incriminating records could be destroyed within hours of receiving threat warnings. Her new systems included multiple backup storage locations and coded communication methods that would allow coordination of emergency responses even if family members were separated during crisis situations. The successful management of McKenna's inspection convinced the family that their operation was essentially immune to detection by church or civil authorities. Their confidence in their security procedures and corrupt official network reached new heights, leading them to believe that they could continue their murderous activities indefinitely without serious risk of exposure. However, the inspection crisis had also demonstrated that their operation attracted more attention than they had previously realized. McKenna's visit represented the beginning of increased scrutiny that would eventually culminate in their exposure and destruction. The seeds of their downfall had been planted by their very success in avoiding detection for over a decade. The autumn of 1844 brought the first cracks in the protective facade that had shielded the Ashworth family's murderous operation for over 13 years. Local families throughout western Pennsylvania had begun connecting disturbing patterns that individual disappearances had previously obscured. When viewed collectively, the vanishing of relatives and friends who had sought spiritual guidance at St. Bartholomew's Monastery revealed a statistical impossibility that even the most trusting community members could no longer ignore. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Martha Whitman, a shopkeeper in the nearby town of Millerville, had maintained detailed customer records that inadvertently documented the disappearances of several individuals who had purchased supplies before journeying to the monastery for spiritual retreats. Her meticulous business practices, originally intended to track credit and payment arrangements, had created an accidental database of missing persons that revealed the monastery's connection to multiple disappearances. Whitman's record showed that at least 7 customers had mentioned plans to visit St. Bartholomew's for extended spiritual exercises between 1841 and 1844. None had returned to settle outstanding accounts or retrieve personal items left in her custody for safekeeping. Her attempts to contact these individuals through letters sent to the monastery had received standardized responses claiming that the persons in question had decided to embrace monastic life and sever all worldly connections. The shopkeeper's growing suspicions prompted her to share her concerns with other local business owners who had similar experiences with customers who had vanished after visiting the monastery. Miller's Inn, located on the main road leading to St. Bartholomew's, had records of guests who had departed for the monastery but never returned to retrieve luggage or settle accounts. The local blacksmith had tools and equipment belonging to customers who had mentioned spiritual retreats but never returned to claim their property. These individual observations, when combined, created a pattern that suggested something far more sinister than coincidental decisions by multiple individuals to abandon their worldly lives simultaneously. The probability that so many unconnected people would independently choose to sever all ties with their previous lives after visiting the same religious facility struck even the most devout community members as highly suspicious. Father Patrick Kelly, the parish priest serving Millerville and surrounding communities, became the focal point for these growing concerns when worried family members began approaching him for assistance in locating missing relatives. Kelly's position provided him with access to church communication networks that should have enabled him to verify claims about individuals entering monastic life at St. Bartholomew's. His inquiries to diocesan authorities, however, produced contradictory information that increased rather than alleviated his suspicions. Kelly's investigation revealed that official church records contained no documentation of new monastic vacations at St. Bartholomew's during the period when multiple individuals had supposedly entered religious life there. The discrepancy between Edmund Ashworth's claims and official diocesan records suggested either serious administrative failures or deliberate deception that warranted further investigation. The priest's growing alarm prompted him to organize a systematic inquiry involving family members of missing persons and local business owners who had documented interactions with the vanished individuals. This informal investigation revealed additional disturbing patterns that strengthened suspicions about the monastery's role in the disappearances. Several missing persons had liquidated substantial assets before departing for their spiritual retreats, converting property and investments into cash that they carried with them to St. Bartholomew's. The amounts involved represented significant wealth that would have been attractive to criminals seeking valuable targets. The coincidence of multiple wealthy individuals simultaneously deciding to donate their entire fortunes to the same remote monastery struck investigators as highly implausible. Kelly's inquiries also revealed that several missing persons had written farewell letters to family members using nearly identical language that suggested coaching or dictation rather than spontaneous expression of personal decisions. The formulaic nature of these communications, combined with handwriting irregularities noted by family members, provided additional evidence that the supposed monastic vacations might have been fabricated to conceal more sinister explanations for the disappearances. The investigation's most significant breakthrough came when Kelly located a survivor. Elizabeth Hartwell had visited St. Bartholomew's in late 1843 seeking spiritual comfort after her husband's death, but had fled the monastery after witnessing activities that convinced her the facility was engaged in criminal behavior. Her testimony provided the first eyewitness account of systematic exploitation occurring within the monastery's walls. Hartwell's description of the women's quarters revealed facilities designed for interrogation and detention rather than spiritual counseling. She reported seeing specialized chambers equipped with restraints and soundproofing that served no legitimate religious purpose. Her observations of Margaret Ashworth's techniques for extracting personal information from visitors matched patterns that investigators had identified in other disappearance cases. The survivor's testimony also provided details about the monastery's security procedures that suggested preparation for concealing criminal activities from potential investigators. She described hidden passages, concealed storage areas, and communication systems that would have been unnecessary for legitimate religious operations but perfect for coordinating illegal activities while avoiding detection. Kelly's compilation of evidence from multiple sources created a compelling case that St. Bartholomew's Monastery was engaged in systematic criminal activity disguised as religious ministry. His documentation included witness testimony, business records, correspondence analysis, and official church records that collectively painted a picture of large-scale fraud and possible murder occurring under the protection of religious authority. As winter approached in 1844, Kelly faced the crucial decision of whether to present his evidence to civil authorities or pursue the matter through church channels. His investigation had revealed criminal activity that demanded immediate intervention, but his position as a parish priest complicated his ability to make accusations against a respected religious facility without risking his own career and reputation. If you're feeling disturbed by how long this investigation took to gain momentum, remember that in the 1840s, communication between communities was limited and record-keeping was inconsistent. Criminal patterns that would be obvious today could remain hidden for years when victims came from different towns and counties. What matters is that brave individuals like Father Kelly eventually connected the dots and refused to ignore the truth. Share this story with others who need to understand the importance of speaking up when something doesn't feel right, and hit that like button to support our efforts to preserve these important historical lessons. The mounting evidence against the Ashworth family represented the beginning of the end for their murderous enterprise. Kelly's investigation had created a foundation of documentation that would prove impossible to suppress through the family's usual methods of corruption and intimidation. The protective isolation that had enabled their crimes for over a decade was finally beginning to crumble under the weight of accumulated suspicion and systematic inquiry. Father Kelly's decision to present his evidence to Pennsylvania state authorities in early 1845 marked the beginning of the first legitimate investigation into the Ashworth family's criminal enterprise. His carefully documented case prompted State Attorney General William Morrison to assign a team of experienced investigators who possessed both the authority and resources necessary to penetrate the protective network that had shielded the monastery from scrutiny for over a decade. The state investigation team, led by Detective Captain James Sullivan, brought sophisticated investigative techniques that far exceeded the capabilities of local law enforcement officials who had been compromised by Ashworth corruption. Sullivan's background investigating organized criminal networks in Philadelphia had prepared him to recognize the systematic nature of the monastery's operations and the extent of official corruption that had enabled their crimes. Sullivan's first breakthrough came through financial analysis that revealed suspicious patterns in regional banking transactions. His examination of currency movements through multiple county banks identified unusual deposits coinciding with reported disappearances at St. Bartholomew's. The correlation between missing persons reports and subsequent large cash transactions provided compelling evidence of systematic theft accompanying the disappearances. The investigation team's most significant discovery involved the emergence of Sarah Mitchell, a second survivor whose testimony corroborated and expanded upon Elizabeth Hartwell's account of criminal activities at the monastery. Mitchell had escaped from the women's quarters in March 1844 after witnessing the murder of another visitor during what Margaret Ashworth had described as a purification ceremony. Mitchell's testimony provided devastating details about the family's operational methods that confirmed investigators' worst suspicions about the scope of criminal activity at St. Bartholomew's. Her description of systematic torture used to extract information from victims revealed the calculated cruelty underlying the family's apparently compassionate religious ministry. Her eyewitness account of murder eliminated any possibility that the disappearances could be attributed to voluntary decisions to embrace monastic life. The survivors' detailed knowledge of the monastery's hidden facilities provided investigators with specific locations to search for physical evidence of criminal activity. Her descriptions of underground chambers, concealed disposal sites, and specialized equipment used for interrogation and murder gave the investigation team precise targets for evidence gathering that would have been impossible to locate through random searches. Sullivan's team also discovered that personal belongings taken from victims were being sold through a network of corrupt merchants operating throughout western Pennsylvania. The systematic disposal of stolen property revealed the industrial scale of the family's operation and provided additional evidence linking specific missing persons to criminal activity at the monastery. The investigation's expansion revealed that the Ashworth family's corrupt official network extended far beyond local law enforcement to include county clerks, court officials, and even certain church authorities who had been systematically compromised through bribes and intimidation. This widespread corruption explained how the family had maintained their operation for over a decade without detection by civil or religious authorities. Detective Captain Sullivan's team identified Sheriff William Hendricks as a key figure in the protection network, leading to surveillance operations that documented his regular visits to the monastery and his efforts to suppress local investigations into missing persons reports. Evidence of Hendricks' corruption provided the state authorities with leverage to compel cooperation from other compromised officials who might otherwise have continued protecting the Ashworth family. The investigation also uncovered Dr. Samuel Morrison's role in providing fraudulent death certificates that concealed the true cause of victim deaths. Medical records obtained through state authority revealed a pattern of suspicious certifications that coincided with reported disappearances, providing additional evidence of systematic criminal activity disguised as natural deaths from illness or accident. Catherine Ashworth's meticulous record-keeping, originally intended to protect the family by documenting their activities, became their greatest vulnerability when investigators discovered hidden ledgers that detailed every aspect of their criminal enterprise. Her careful documentation of victim information, stolen assets, and operational procedures provided prosecutors with comprehensive evidence of premeditated murder and systematic theft spanning nearly 15 years. The discovery of these records revealed the staggering scope of the family's crimes, documenting the murders of over 150 individuals and theft of assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars in contemporary currency. The ledgers also identified dozens of corrupt officials and criminal associates who had enabled the family's operation through protection, money laundering, and disposal of stolen property. Sullivan's investigation team faced increasing pressure from the Ashworth family's desperate attempts to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence as the investigation closed in on their operation. Thomas Ashworth's efforts to murder Sarah Mitchell and intimidate other potential witnesses demonstrated the family's continued commitment to preserving their criminal enterprise through violence and intimidation. The family's growing paranoia led to increasingly erratic behavior that attracted additional attention from investigators and local community members. Edmund's abandonment of his carefully cultivated scholarly persona in favor of more aggressive tactics to suppress the investigation marked a fundamental shift that eliminated much of the protective facade that had concealed their crimes for over a decade. Margaret Ashworth's attempts to relocate the most incriminating evidence from the women's quarters resulted in the accidental discovery of human remains by investigators conducting surveillance of the monastery grounds. The physical evidence of murder eliminated any remaining doubt about the criminal nature of the family's activities and provided prosecutors with irrefutable proof of systematic killing. By the summer of 1845, Sullivan's investigation had accumulated overwhelming evidence of the Ashworth family's crimes while systematically dismantling the corrupt network that had protected their operation. The family's realization that their protective facade had been completely penetrated prompted desperate attempts to escape justice that would ultimately lead to their final confrontation with the forces of law and order they had successfully evaded for nearly 15 years. The investigation's success represented a triumph of legitimate authority over systematic corruption, but it had required intervention by state-level officials with resources and authority beyond the reach of local criminal influence. The case demonstrated both the vulnerability of isolated communities to organized criminal exploitation and the importance of external oversight in preventing institutional corruption from enabling large-scale criminal enterprises. The mounting evidence against the Ashworth family had created an unstoppable momentum toward justice that no amount of corruption or intimidation could prevent. Their decade and a half of systematic murder and theft was finally approaching its inevitable conclusion as the forces of legitimate law enforcement closed in on their previously impregnable monastery fortress. The confrontation that would finally expose the full scope of the Ashworth family's crimes began at dawn on September 15, 1845, when Detective Captain Sullivan's investigation team surrounded St. Bartholomew's Monastery with a force of 30 state officers backed by federal marshals. The family's desperate attempts to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses had provided investigators with the final pieces of evidence needed to secure arrest warrants and search authorizations that would penetrate every corner of their criminal enterprise. Edmund Ashworth's initial response to the arrival of state authorities demonstrated the arrogance and confidence that had sustained his criminal operation for nearly 15 years. His attempt to invoke religious sanctuary and claim immunity from civil investigation based on church authority revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of how completely his protective network had been compromised by Sullivan's systematic investigation. The priest's demands to speak only with diocesan officials rather than state investigators collapsed when Bishop McKenna himself arrived to formally withdraw church protection from the monastery and authorize complete cooperation with civil authorities. McKenna's presence eliminated Edmund's last hope of using religious authority to delay or deflect the investigation that was finally exposing his family's systematic murder operation. Margaret Ashworth's response to the confrontation revealed the calculating intelligence that had made her such an effective partner in the family's criminal enterprise. Her immediate attempts to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against other family members demonstrated her realistic assessment of their hopeless situation and her prioritization of personal survival over family loyalty that had sustained their operation for over a decade. The search of the women's quarters produced physical evidence that confirmed investigators' worst suspicions about the systematic nature of criminal activity at St. Bartholomew's. Discovery of restraint devices, soundproofing materials, and specialized interrogation equipment eliminated any possibility that the family's activities could be attributed to religious enthusiasm or misguided spiritual practices rather than calculated criminal exploitation. Thomas Ashworth's violent resistance to arrest resulted in a gun battle that claimed the lives of 2 state officers and revealed the extent to which the family was prepared to fight rather than face justice for their crimes. His desperate attempt to reach the underground disposal chambers where the most incriminating evidence lay hidden provided investigators with precise directions to locations that might otherwise have remained concealed indefinitely. The discovery of Catherine's hidden ledgers in a secret compartment beneath the monastery's altar represented the investigation's most devastating breakthrough. Her meticulous documentation of every aspect of the family's criminal enterprise provided prosecutors with comprehensive evidence that would make conviction inevitable regardless of any defensive strategies the family might attempt to employ. Catherine's records revealed not only the scope of individual crimes but also the systematic nature of the family's operation that had transformed St. Bartholomew's Monastery into what investigators described as an industrial murder facility. Her documentation of victim processing procedures, asset liquidation methods, and disposal techniques demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication that exceeded anything previously encountered by Pennsylvania law enforcement. The ledgers also identified the complete network of corrupt officials who had enabled the family's operation through protection, evidence suppression, and money laundering services. These revelations prompted a secondary wave of arrests that ultimately implicated over 20 local and county officials in criminal conspiracy charges that would reshape the political landscape of western Pennsylvania. Sullivan's team discovered that the family had maintained detailed intelligence files on potential threats to their operation, including dossiers on local law enforcement officials, church authorities, and community leaders who might pose investigative risks. This surveillance network had provided early warning of previous threats while identifying individuals who could be corrupted or intimidated into cooperation with their criminal activities. The search of the monastery's extensive grounds revealed burial sites containing the remains of nearly 200 victims whose disappearances had been attributed to voluntary decisions to embrace monastic life or continue spiritual journeys elsewhere. The systematic nature of these burial sites, carefully mapped and organized to maximize disposal efficiency, provided irrefutable evidence of premeditated murder on an unprecedented scale. Edmund's final attempt to escape justice involved a desperate effort to reach the limestone caves where the family had disposed of their most recent victims. His capture at the entrance to these underground chambers provided investigators with access to evidence that revealed the industrial methods the family had developed for processing multiple victims simultaneously while eliminating all traces of their crimes. Margaret's decision to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced sentencing provided detailed testimony about the family's operational methods that confirmed every aspect of the evidence gathered through Sullivan's investigation. Her clinical descriptions of victim selection criteria, interrogation techniques, and execution procedures revealed the calculated cruelty that had characterized the family's systematic exploitation of desperate individuals seeking spiritual comfort. The discovery of forged documents in Catherine's possession revealed that the family had been systematically stealing victim identities to continue profiting from their deaths long after the murders had been completed. Insurance fraud, property theft, and identity assumption had generated ongoing revenue streams that supplemented the immediate profits from robbery and murder. Thomas's wounded confession, provided while receiving medical treatment for injuries sustained during his capture, included details about disposal methods that helped investigators locate additional burial sites and recover evidence that had been hidden throughout the monastery's 300-acre property. His testimony revealed that the family's operation had been far more extensive than even the most pessimistic estimates had suggested. The investigation's final phase involved systematic excavation of burial sites identified through family records and testimony, revealing physical evidence that would provide irrefutable proof of systematic murder spanning nearly 16 years. The recovery of victim remains, personal belongings, and identifying documents eliminated any possibility of defensive claims that the disappearances could be attributed to voluntary decisions rather than criminal activity. By October 1845, Sullivan's investigation had compiled evidence documenting the systematic murder of 198 individuals and theft of assets worth nearly $500,000 in contemporary currency. The scope of the Ashworth family's crimes exceeded anything previously encountered in American criminal history, establishing them as perhaps the most prolific serial killers the nation had yet produced. The family's capture marked the end of the most sophisticated criminal enterprise that had operated under the protection of religious authority in Pennsylvania's history. Their systematic exploitation of spiritual authority and institutional corruption had enabled crimes on a scale that would not be equaled until the emergence of organized criminal syndicates in the 20th century.